Hi everybody, welcome back. When Hawaii was peopled by giants. A scientist makes amazing discoveries in island catacombs which are older than those of Rome, by H. Coffin Berry in San Francisco, California. This newspaper article is from the Sunday Advertiser, March 22, 1908. So I have quite a few of these that are new. I doubt many viewers have seen before. I know that you guys have seen some of these pictures before of these amazing formations of petrified giants from high altitude photos, so I'll try to include some of those as well. There have been so many amazing discoveries in the last few years. What an incredible journey that we've all been on discovering these things. So I thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your participation in this. Without you guys, we would never have found any of this stuff. When Hawaii was peopled by giants. Much has been written regarding the subterranean excavations or catacombs, which are found in all directions outside the walls of Rome and elsewhere, and which served as places of worship and refuge for the living, and a final resting place for the dead. But it is not generally known that within our own Hawaiian territory, an ancient, primitive people similarly obtained security for their departed. The excavations, passages, and galleries about Rome were hollowed out of dry, porous lava rock, which served its purpose well. Nature, which always smiles upon sub-equatorial native and induces inertia, furnished the lava formation with ready-made passages, galleries, and playhouses of all shapes and dimensions. By far the greater number of catacombs about Rome are subsequent to the middle of the 2nd century, while those of the Hawaiian Islands antedate them by many centuries, and unlike those of Rome, still remain a sealed storehouse of vast information awaiting scientific inspection and research. These islands resemble in part a large sponge of lava and volcanic slag, and so frequent are the caves and volcano bubbles that one might search carefully for many weeks or months without finding even a suggestion of ancient habitation. If you wish a correct impression of these islands and cannot spare the time for an ocean voyage of 6 days, just make the ascent of Mount Hamilton some clear night and look at the moon through the big telescope at Lick Observatory. You will then see the extinct craters and lava beds as they would appear above the Hawaiian Islands. Method of burial. Several different methods of burial were practiced, depending upon station. The funeral rites of a high chief differed widely from those of the common people, human sacrifices being offered that he might enter the other world with attendants suitable to his rank. He cleansed bones, entirely freed from the flesh and neatly covered with kapa and red feathers, were eventually concealed in some secret and inaccessible cave by a trusty attendant, selected before death and sworn to secrecy. The bones were carried to the selected place of concealment by night when the attendants had fallen asleep and after the Kuni sorcerers had avenged the chief's death, usually supposed to be due to evil spirits. The common people also were buried in caves or subterranean caverns by night, and frequently we find the body embalmed by means of salt or some drying process, the upper part of the body being bent forward to the knees, with the head, hands, and knees bound together by means of a cord, the body wrapped in coarse matting or kapa, and then placed in some open cave and surrounded by household effects, implements of war, canoes, treasure chests, articles of food, etc. The cave was then carefully concealed from view by means of loose stones, which were in turn concealed and protected by means of a thick growth of lantana, which bristles with poisonous thorns, and which, when dry and brittle, penetrate the flesh like needles, break off, and cause painful wounds. During the first few days after death, ghosts are supposed to haunt burial caves and battlefields and to endeavor to strangle their enemies, but gradually become weaker. To look upon certain of these was supposed to cause instant death, and I have met natives even today who believe that they have seen the spirit of some departed chief marching by night with his ghostly attendants. Nightmare supposedly results from a ghost sitting upon the sleeper. This superstitious dread made the native of early times a mere infant in the hands of the priestcraft and medicine men, who were believed to be descended from the gods and to be in alliance with the invisible powers. And it is little wonder that these ancient burial places, through either fear or accident, are lost to us, and that an endless storehouse of information concerning an early age of stone and wood has remained a closed volume in the world's history, a volume smeared with blood that lies under our very feet and calls up to us for recognition. We of the United States who have taken possession of this tropical fairyland little understand what lies hidden beneath, nor are we making any organized attempt at investigation. The fact that Captain Cook discovered these islands in 1778 means as little to the cave hunting enthusiast as their later discovery by the Taft Party, and finally by W.J. Bryant. The discovery of human bones under ancient coral beds and lava flows, as well as certain cave discoveries, leads us to conclude that emigration to these islands began as early, at least, as 500 AD, and even long before this period there must have been human habitation. These pioneers having been expelled from distant islands of the south or southwest, or driven from their course by konas, or southerly gales, which frequently blow for months at a time. A Japanese fishing junk, which had been blown out of its course in this way, was wrecked upon the island of Oahu in 1832 with 4 men on board, all of whom were rescued by the Hawaiians. Kadu, a native of the Caroline Islands, drifted 1,500 miles due east to the Marshall Islands, where he was rescued by Kotzebue in 1817. These and many other recorded instances and traditions show the chances of migration from west to east. Plant and animal life, as we see it, are also in support of this conclusion. And again, the natives of all of these groups of islands from New Zealand to the Hawaiian Islands, scattered over a distance of 4,000 miles, speak dialects of the same language and have the same physical appearance, manners, customs, religions, rites, taboos, and traditions. We now have much reason for believing that this vast and scattered Polynesian race originally came from Asia, as did some of the American pioneers whose descendants are our American Indians. I saw 2 ancient idols dug from beneath an old rice field on Pearl Harbor, which instantly suggested the totem poles of our Haida Indians. And I have seen Japanese students attempt conversation with Siwash Indians, mistaking them for coolies of their own country. Hunting burial cave. A cave hunting equipment consists of a long, stout rope for lowering oneself into holes or over precipices that look promising, a pair of field glasses for the examination of distant openings, mosquito netting for protecting the face from insects and yellow jackets which infest all Hawaiian caves, a sharp hatchet or cane knife for cutting away lantana, whose poisonous thorns make progress at times absolutely impossible, a reliable lantern, and a pair of thick gloves. Frequently, these caves present only small openings into the wall of some cliff hundreds of feet above the canyon, while in other cases one must be lowered directly into some dark hole at the risk of being stung to death. And again, other caves are reached only by diving beneath the ocean's surface during calm weather. In January 1905, after 2 weeks of the severest physical exertion and being repeatedly stung and lacerated by lantana and cacti, we finally came upon an ancient burial cave of considerable magnitude. A half-white native boy whom I had lured into service, and whose name I curtailed to Pau, from one of sufficient length to have perspective, was removing the luscious fruit from the abundant cacti, preparing it for lunch by rubbing off the needle-like thorns on his coat sleeve, when he noticed the repeated flight of bees from the cacti to a small opening almost under our feet. A few moments of energetic work with arcane knives and the removal of a bushel or 2 of lava rock revealed an opening just large enough for a man's body. After burning out the bees and yellow jackets, I lowered the native into the opening to a distance of about 10 feet, where he secured a footing, fastening the rope above. I was about to join him with my bicycle lamp, when in a voice unnecessarily loud and agitated, he began casting insinuations derogatory to the moral character of insects, past, present, and future. The yellow jackets had gotten at him, and stimulated a subterranean vocabulary that was positively poetic. A peculiar echo of the cave made it seem that he was swearing in 2 languages at once, each oath being as neatly welded as links in an endless chain. I hauled him out as quickly as possible, and in a few moments we both entered the cave well protected by mosquito netting and lighted by a calcium carbide lamp. This cave led gradually downhill for 100 feet to an opening in the sheer wall of a cliff, where we could look down for hundreds of feet to a stream below, where wild bananas and hau trees were growing. The entrance within the cave was thickly covered with disintegrated lava rock, but farther along we soon saw that the abode had been previously entered, and after much searching, that our path led through a small opening about 4 feet above the floor and into a much larger volcanic bubble, which was the actual burial cave, and which soon set my blood tingling. At the farther end of the cave, which must have been 300 feet in length, sat 5 giant human forms, wrapped in kappa cloth, with head and arms resting upon the knees, covered with the dry dust of ages of rock disintegration, and apparently asleep. For a moment I stood spellbound with my light thrown upon them, for it seemed that surely they must awaken at any moment, turn their parched and faded countenances toward me, and demand an explanation. I found myself quoting Omar, as I did during student days when I visited Cappuccini in Rome. under which the Capuchin friars lie mummified in holy earth brought from Jerusalem, and where the living and departed of the order look nearly enough alike to make it embarrassing for the visitor. When you and I behind the veil are past, oh, but the long, long while the world shall last, which of our coming and departure heeds, as the sea's self should heed a pebble cast. And even as I stood thus, they seemed to take up my thought and mumble in unison, oh, but the long, long while the world shall last. My reverie was suddenly interrupted by a blood-curdling moan which came from far away and back of me. Pau, in attempting to escape in the darkness, had fallen through the small opening and was floundering about like a lost soul cast into the bottomless pit. He had lost his mosquito netting as well as his vocabulary, which was unfortunate, for the yellow jackets were at him again. The 5 giant forms before me were those of hardened warriors of the old school, and had sat thus waiting for fully 1,000 years. They all measured much over 6 feet in height, and in life must have weighed fully 300 pounds. The tallest by actual measurement being 6 feet 5 inches in height. Near him was a calabash and wooden plate, as well as a poi pounder of lava rock of a pattern dating back to the earliest period of Hawaiian occupation. Also an enormous club of hardwood fitted with shark's teeth. This war club I could barely lift by means of the smooth handle, using both hands. And yet, judging from the size of its owner's hands and the smallness of the handle, I am led to believe that he managed to swing the weapon using one hand only. The average height of the present-day Hawaiian is 5 feet 9. Judging by this find and several others which followed, I should place the height of the ancient race much above 6 feet. A skeleton found by others in a cave at Walmia measured 6 feet 7 3/4 inches, and early missionaries report having seen many that measured between 6 and 7 feet. These bodies on closer inspection resembled faded parchment and seemed to have been embalmed in some way with salt. The teeth were as beautiful as polished ivory, except in 2 cases, where 2 and 3 upper and lower front teeth had been knocked out. The other finds of the cave consisted of 2 rough lava lamps, a dozen stone adzes of various sizes, 1 mirror of highly polished stone, and some other small stone and bone articles which I am unable to classify. The air in the cave soon became so stifling that I was compelled to make a hasty retreat, taking with me only a few of the lighter articles and leaving the warriors of old to continue their sleep, practically undisturbed. After closing up and concealing the entrance to our cave, Pau explained to me the use of the polished disc of stone, used as a mirror by placing it within a calabash and covering with water. Much to my astonishment, the reflection was as perfect as mercury could possibly give. During 1905, we discovered 4 other caves, but 3 of these had been looted and nothing of importance left aside from a few bones, a fragment of kappa cloth and an adze or 2. Late in March, however, while attempting to follow some wild goats up a cliff, I came upon an open cave which evidently had been used by the animals as a place of shelter, and which afforded me good opportunity for scanning the opposite wall of the canyon for likely places. Human sacrifice stone. Just below me and beyond this point, I soon discovered the wall of an ancient heiau or pagan temple. An hour's work with a sharp cane knife removed sufficient lantana to enable me to reach this wall, which was about 4 feet high, 3 feet wide, and enclosed about a half acre. The floor of the enclosure was carefully paved with flat stones which had been well selected and put in place with considerable skill. Within the enclosure was a massive stone as large as a common table and with a naturally flat surface. This had been used in ages past, undoubtedly by the priests in offering up human sacrifices. A thick growth of lantana, hau, and ki trees have entirely concealed this temple from one passing along the stream below. In the cliff just above the enclosure were 2 very promising caves which had been enlarged, made symmetrical, and probably used as a retreat by the kahuna or priest. Just beyond this point, we were compelled to use rope and tackle in making the descent of perhaps 50 feet to the floor below, where we found 3 skeletons and but 1 mummified body wrapped in coarse matting. There seemed to be no plan of burial in this case, nor in the distribution of effects, which were scattered about promiscuously. Here we found a crudely carved oblong wooden bowl supported by 2 distorted figures resembling those often seen in the ivory carving of the Orient. Also 3 stone lamps, one of which had been making from a broken poi pounder, a mortar and pestle, several adzes, some fish hooks of bone, several yards of coconut fiber rope, and the usual calabash containing some minor ornaments and decomposed foodstuff. The full extent of these caves I was never fully able to determine, for the air was stifling and seemed mixed with carbon dioxide, which repeatedly extinguished our lights and made the task hazardous in more ways than one. At a later date, however, I found part of an idol just within the opening and hid beneath the stones. It had been burned and partly destroyed at some time, and may have belonged to the temple. Natives oppose research. In carrying on these rather superficial investigations, I was compelled to use the utmost caution and secrecy, as many of the natives are still extremely superstitious and opposed to research along these lines. I usually started out in hunting jacket with gun or rifle, as if seeking wild pig or pheasant. These impedimenta one can readily cache in some cave or hollow tree in exchange for the real needs of the day. My observations led me to draw several conclusions regarding the ancient Hawaiians. 1. They were much taller, larger, and more powerful physically than at the present day. Their carvings of figures upon idols and household articles are strongly suggestive of the Asiatic, while their decorations or totems resemble closely those of the Haida Indians. Their stone implements resemble those of our American Indians only to a limited degree, but this may result from there being a limited variety of rock material to select from. And very frequently, as with our Alaskan Indians, wood and bone were used when flint or metal would have served better had they been available. In the weaving of baskets and matting, they resembled both the Asiatic and our northwestern Indians, as well as the cliff dwellers of Arizona and Utah. In the making of finely woven string from human hair, they resemble again the cliff dwellers, while in weaving of flowers and feathers they resemble our Indians, although unlike them they never attempted pottery making. In the use of bow and arrow, as well as in dancing, with accompaniment of drum, flute, and rattle, they resemble the Indians. 6. The consulting of household gods or medicine, previous to undertakings of importance, characterize the Asiatic, Hawaiian, and Indian. 7. Their common burials suggest again the cliff dweller. These and many other resemblances, too numerous to be given space here, suggest a relationship between these primitive and scattered races, and one of Asiatic origin, and yet this may be due in part to environment, for we well know that all races in the world's history have developed along certain well-defined lines. A study of the architecture, forms of decoration, burials, etc., observed in excavating the ancient ruins of Old Mexico, for example, have told us approximately at what period these places were inhabited by comparison with similar ruins of known age in European countries. But in the case of the Hawaiian Islands, the excavating is still to be done, and material at hand is insufficient to allow of positive statement. So that's that one. I have so many more.